And as I said, we'll have time for questions at the end. So as you'll be aware, today marks the first day of National Biodiversity Week. And this is one of many events that will take place. The idea for Biodiversity Week is to connect people with nature, to communicate the importance of biodiversity and encourage people to play their part. And there's more about Biodiversity Week on the website biodiversityweek.ie. We're really delighted to have Karen DUBSKY here tonight to talk about coastal riches and coastal restoration. Karen is an experienced member of the environmental NGO community. She's a postgraduate scientist, researcher, consultant, and teacher, so many hats, and works in Trinity College in Dublin. Has lots of scientific and legal expertise across a huge range of areas. Karen founded Coastwatch, which developed into Coastwatch Europe, which is a voluntary organization that monitors coastal and wetland environments in several European countries, and campaigns for improvement to environmental policy and for the implementation of environmental legislation, and also organizes public information events and seminars like tonight. And you can find out more about that in coastwatch.org, and I'll pop all of these links into the chat session as well. As long as I've known Karen, she's been a tireless campaigner and advocate for the sector. And according to her own Wikipedia page, thanks to her campaign work, she's helped reform legislation requiring public information on water quality of bathing beaches, which was introduced in Ireland ahead of other countries, and so many other things. So I'm really delighted to welcome you to speak now, Karen, and thank you so much. Please take the floor.
Claire, thank you very, very much. As you said, I'm really, really happy to speak here, but I'll speak quite briefly so that you can also ask questions. And I will send you my PowerPoint afterwards, because it has been a chaotic day because it's the first day of Biodiversity Week. And we've had a lizard and newt event on, and since then, and we have field work. And my computer doesn't seem to like Biodiversity Day because some of my photos and videos have disappeared and gone all jungling as I quickly went to prepare for this now. So I always have a backup plan B, and that is to show you some coastal riches and maybe as symbols of what it is. If you closed your eyes and thought of the coast of Ireland and the riches, what would you think? Would you think of listening to the radio and O'Leary of bluish turquoise water and suntan lotion and sitting in a deck chair with an umbrella somewhere in another country? Or could you think of somewhere in Ireland in over 7,000 kilometers of coast, crawling around as the tide goes out, and you're listening to all these different creatures? Because when periwinkles and limpets and those guys, when they go home as the tide recedes, they actually wear, it sounds like they're wearing shoes, and they go click, clack, and click, clack. So some of them, I don't know whether anybody can see this. Actually, can you see this properly? Yeah. So do you know what that is? Can anyone put it into the chat? Something very common in Ireland. Any chats here? Yes. So first time around. Of course, it's the limpet. We have 6 different species of them in Ireland. We take them for granted. None of them left in Germany. There is Rocky Shore, there's Helgoland, but I know the prof who carefully hammered off the last 2 limpets and said, these are going into alcohol. They're the last ones, and I'm going to preserve them to show them to my students. That loss was an ongoing, slow loss, with oil pollution as the oil rigs were getting going, as ships were passing. Oil was probably background, little bits of oil were probably the most important reason, although they weren't sure why. The limpets totally disappeared. If you go along our shores, well, you'd see this on my slide later, but you'd see these wonderful, incredibly beautiful blue-rayed limpets, little limpets, which live on kelp and on sea spaghetti. This is just a small kelp I brought in quickly now because I don't have too much space behind me. You see this? It's a dried kelp. The holdfast is down at the bottom where it holds onto rocks. Then you have a stipe, and then you have got the top. And because it's dry now, I don't want to dribble all over the house. The blue-rayed limpet would live either in the holdfast in the winter or on the blade. On the Irish coast, for some reason, when we are doing the Coastwatch survey, we have found a few of these blue-rayed limpets south of Dublin, few north of Dublin, but otherwise there seems to be a blue-rayed limpet desert until you get down to Kilmore Quay or right up the top to County Down. Why is that happening? You have other species like dog whelks. Now this isn't actually a dog whelk. Ta-da! You see these big guys? They're the common whelks, which you could also put into your ear to hear the sea. And they lay eggs. These are the egg cases. Can you see that? So this is like nature's polystyrene. She would go and go bloop, 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 and blow air into these individual little pieces. And in each one, there is a baby in a yolk sac. The baby hatches, gets out, walks around and looks for food. One little whelk like that will produce a little egg mass. But if this whelk is allowed to grow really big, say like this one, it'll produce far more babies. At the moment, any size whelk basically is taken, which can be sold. There's no closed area for them. Where there is whelk, you can go fish. There is no closed season. This is the underlying problem which we have for many things. As somebody finds a use for them, a sales value, we go out and we harvest, and 9 times out of 10, the harvesting is who can harvest as much as possible to make as much money as possible. Those riches then quickly decline or slowly decline, depending on what that animal is like or that plant. And then afterwards, when it's either lost or the numbers have gone really down or the fishermen can't fish it anymore and are complaining, then we think of restoration. So this has been the pattern. Maybe it has been the pattern for thousands of years. And there are two sides to this. One, can we, in 2021, think of a different way, a precautionary approach? Introduce the equivalent of an environmental impact statement to an environmental impact statement, not just on big plans for a housing estate or something, but also on what we plan to do before we go and harvest a new species. You know, in Bantry Bay, BioAtlantis wanted to harvest kelp. They wanted to cut it at 6 inches from the base. So when this is dried out, and when it dries, it gets small. But when it's tall, 6 inches from the base is roughly here. The old Irish way of cutting would be to cut it at the top like fingernails. If you cut here, it will die. If you cut the top, it will live. So when we are cutting, when we are harvesting, there were very old ways, traditional ways of harvesting, which developed slowly. And as people learned, they would adapt and in many cases, do things sustainably. Nowadays, we are very, very fast. Our technology is wow. And we have the potential to destroy way, way more. So I think the first lesson is that because our power to destroy, the speed to destroy, has become so much more overwhelming, it is essential that we use the precautionary approach and that we introduce extra ways of assessing, even if it's not in the EIA directive. It should be in our heads and in our hearts that we assess what we do. And another aspect is cumulative impacts. You know the way if you get a downer, somebody says something nasty and you think, oh. But imagine if somebody said something nasty all day, you would really be depressed. And so the slight disturbance all day is the equivalent to a human constantly being told, you're ugly and you're bad and I don't want you. So animals which are being disturbed or plants which are being trampled on, they might survive, but they won't do well. So it is both a survival and it is quality and quantity. I think there's a huge amount of hope now put into a new EU proposal for restoration. And I really, really welcome that proposal, and it will make a difference, because at the moment, one fascinating thing about judges is the vast majority of judges think that if something is gone, like a habitat, like an area, that then it's gone. So you might as well just pay money as a compensation for all the hassle you've caused everyone. But nature, so money might change hands, but nature might stay damaged. And one of those cases, for example, was Wexford County Council took a developer to court who had accidentally infilled a wetland near Rosslare to build some extra houses and to get rid of his waste. And the county council did a very, very good enforcement job. It came to court, and I was there as well as an expert witness. And the judge said, yes, it's very clear cut that this developer had done something which was not legal under the Planning Act. But then he mused, well, all the life which was there is now gone. So he will have to pay a fine, and then he'll have to ask for retention of what he had, and he left that to the local authorities. Now, under this new proposal, which the EU is developing at the moment, that is going to be far less likely. And lawyers and planners and authorities will have to look at the restoration potential or compensation elsewhere. So things look as if they might improve. Overall, we have a biodiversity crisis and a climate crisis, and those two coming together, our government has acknowledged, is an enormous, enormous threat for us. And the two come together. At the moment, I'm working on the Waterford Estuary, and it is as though the more you look, the more problems you find. It is a wonderful estuary. It's where the three sister rivers come together. And the estuary is protected as a Natura 2000 site, under the Habitats Directive. The River Suir is protected, the River Barrow and Nore are protected, and further down the estuary. And then when you get to the tip of the estuary at Hook Head, I don't know if any of you know that, that's also protected. But when you look at that area and what is happening to it, and how the quality is moderate, but holding on to its fingernails in the water, how the species for which it is protected, 6 different fish species, eel, salmon, trade shad, river lamprey, sea lamprey, brook lamprey, all of those are not at favorable conservation status. And why is that? We are so rich. That estuary is, I don't know how many of you know that estuary, but you have to go to it. It's the most beautiful, the most incredible, from the fossils and the limestone at Hook Head and Brownstown Head, going up into the different stages of an estuary, the beauty of the history of it, the forts, the archaeology, the fossils, the life, the animals, the plants, the diving club coming up with all the different seaweeds. Ireland has over 500 species of seaweed, and many of them are found just off Hook Head. Huge numbers of sprat came into that estuary last autumn. And just to give you one example of one pressure and ask you, how can we tackle that pressure? So all these sprats were coming zoom, up the estuary in big pulses. On the spring tides, they were coming in. Millions of sprats. For sprat, this little fish, which is quite delicious to eat, when you looked at them in a net, when you scooped them up out of the water, most of them were undersized. They were juveniles. They were maybe 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds, and the odd adult. They were swimming around, and hot in their pursuit came common dolphins, harbor porpoises, seals. This was a feast. The sprat is a fodder fish. It's near the bottom of the food chain. Of course, it eats others. It eats plankton. It converts plankton into fish, which other fish and other animals can eat. It's a key part of that food chain. So what do we humans do? Well, we look at it and we say there are an awful lot of fishermen who have overfished other fish, or maybe lost them due to pollution or other reasons. And here's an opportunity to take lots of fish. So we will stand back and we'll just see what happens. And fishermen were coming from all around the country into the Waterford estuary, and were taking the fish, pair trawling, up and down. As the dead common dolphins, harbor porpoise, seals were washing up, caught as bycatch, as the number of sprat, the tons and tons of them were increasing, and we were getting more and more worried and asking and begging the ministers, please do something. You can't just take thousands of tons of fish. They all had their earmuffs on. Every one of them said that there isn't really the adequate legislation. The minister could have closed it, the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, but he didn't. So altogether, in the Waterford estuary, between October of last year and January of this year, until one overloaded boat went down, more fish, 2.5 times more fish was taken out of the Waterford estuary, over 6,000 tons of mainly undersized sprat, mainly for fish meal. 2.5 times more than the International Council for, oh my gosh, there's my mind going, for advising the governments and the EU on how much to take. For the whole of the UK and Ireland all together. And we were taking out 2.5 times that just in the Waterford estuary. if we continue like this, then restoration of our food web will be very difficult, because here it was as though nature was helping us and saying, hey, look at this huge amount, this pulse of just the right conditions, just the right plankton, just the right weather, everything for these fish to have a boom year. And out of that boom, we could have had a recovery of many, many other species which feed on sprat. But we chose not to allow that to happen. We chose to take the fish and process the majority of them to go into fish meal, maybe into aquaculture salmon, maybe into cat food. We don't really know, because that isn't available. We have enormous riches in our seas, but we are interfering in an unacceptable, unsustainable way. And we have to change that. Now I want to just turn to that restoration is possible and give you a few small examples. Now, in my slides, which you get afterwards, you see the dog whelk. Dog whelk is a funny little creature. It eats other shellfish and it moves around, and barnacles delicious as well. And it has a foot, a little bit like common whelk has here, with a line going down, and it puts its foot down and it has a chemical, it drills into its prey, then liquidizes it, sucks it up like in a straw, and munches it. Now, one of the downsides of being a dog whelk is that if you get a bit of TBT paint in the water column, the female thinks it's the most adorable thing ever to have, and actively seeks it out, eats it, and starts turning male. And what you then have, a population which is male, which can't reproduce, and eventually dies out. When scientists notice this, and it isn't just happening to dog whelk, but it's the most widespread indicator species. When scientists saw that, they said, we must stop TBT paint. So TBT paint halt came in a phased fashion starting 25 years ago. And now, finally, we see dog whelks, which were regionally extinct, coming back. And when you go to the shore now at low tide, and they're the most amazing spring low tides coming on the flower moon in May. It's also a super moon, which has the biggest high tides and the lowest low tides next week, even on Sunday when you go and you look into cracks of rocks, you might see little yellow skittles, half the size of a thumbnail, all clumped together with dog whelks around them, as they have just laid their eggs. And when you see that, or you see the eggs of the sea lemon, beautiful, this is egg laying season, and it is full, and the seas are so rich, then you can see this is worth it. We really need to protect it and to watch it. And I'll just give you two examples now of where we did restore and how happy we are about it. In the Boeing Estuary, Drogheda Port was doing development, a capital dredging scheme. And as they were doing various types of work, they were depositing C&D waste and spoil in certain areas, which they were not allowed to do. It looked as though this could be done for taking more land. And Coastwatch first asked, and when nothing happened, then took a High Court case against Drogheda Port. And that was asking for the removal of this material from the mudflats, because the mudflats are really, really important for sea life. And that sea life is protected in the Habitats Directive, in this case, in the Boeing Estuary. And the High Court judge looked at what we were saying in Coast Watch and what the law said, and said for the first time, any judge anywhere, yes, this mud flat should be restored, and ordered Drogheda Port Company to remove the spoil. Drogheda Port Company then got a contractor who started working on it. The contractor worked down. So let's imagine a huge load of, I don't know, maybe 60, 70 loads of spoil, all squeezing down on the mud flat. And the contractor moves it and moves it and moves it. And then the contractor says, I've done enough. And we looked at it and we said, no, it's not enough. It's not deep enough. When the tide comes in, it won't be properly covered. So it will not recover. You're not creating the conditions which will allow full recovery. Sadly, at that time, the Drogheda Port Company got a government official to also look at it. And he said that he was happy with it. He was satisfied with it. So the judge then said, well, if the government official is satisfied with it, then I'm satisfied with it. The problem is, as an estuarine ecologist, I could see that it definitely wasn't mudflat. At very best, it might make a salt marsh. So we decided that we would go to the Supreme Court, because on our side, we had scientific information. What height is it now? What height would a mudflat be? This isn't good enough. On the government side, there was no scientific information. There was simply a statement that this was good enough. And the Supreme Court decided that the scientific information, even if it just comes from mere citizens or environmental group, is what was needed. If it was a government official saying that he's satisfied, then he would have to still give the backup, the scientific backup for that opinion. And that was a wonderful, very, very important judgment, because when we are looking ahead to restoration, we have to be scientific about it. We don't have to create necessarily exactly the same conditions which we had, but we have to be satisfied that this is reasonable and try and pass that by many other people to really understand, and particularly pass it by local people, as we did, the local fishermen and the local bait diggers and the people who knew that area. So maybe to leave with you that it is possible to restore unless the whole thing has gone extinct, but particularly for habitats, to create the conditions so that nature can return. It is also essential that we do this. And I believe that the local people can be the most important people to involve, the local people who know this area, particularly the traditional fishermen who know their own patch really, really well. So I will leave you with that, and with the hope that this will be the year where we gather information, where we halt damage, where we prevent damage. But if it needs restoration, that we pull up our sleeves and we do it. Okay.
Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing your immense passion for this subject and the sense of urgency that we all need to deal with it. And so many good examples. I remember the Drogheda Port case and being so impressed that you took it that far and that the right outcome, you know, it was a landmark case really, and just so important. And I will also go down to the beach next week and look for eggs with the kids. That's really good to know. So I'd like to welcome questions from anyone. There's one just in the chat now, or you can put your hand up and I'll keep an eye on the participant list for those if you want to put your hand up. But the first one is just from, oh, sorry, from Donna, to say, what do you think about sea buckthorn? And are there any ideas for stopping people from trampling dunes?
Oh, wow, that is some subject. Okay, so first, sea buckthorn. Sea buckthorn it's not a native species. Most people would know it. You know, it's bushy and it has bright orange berries in autumn. It could be on dunes, but also on, like with us here, on boulder clay mix. My view is if it happens to stick onto an eroding bank and stay there, then there is a big advantage to it because it's like a trampoline which gets the wave. So with us, the sea buckthorn in one area here is an excellent erosion control, much better than rock armor. It feeds people, it feeds birds. The difficulty with it is what if it starts running all over the place or if it gets into dunes. So in dunes, it can absolutely take over. The roots go all over the place. And I would say I would not allow it to get into dunes. If I see it in dunes, I think Dublin City Council has done a really super job at controlling it. And to the best of my knowledge, that's the only really on Bull Island, very well thought out and planned scheme. So I would say we have to be very, very careful that nobody plants it. I mean, it got into Bull Island because the golf clubs were planting it at the time, not aware how it would just take over. So it's my enemy, my friend. I love it. It's the finest thing to eat in ice cream, but I'd keep it on boulder clay banks, which don't have any particularly sensitive species on them. And what was the other question on it?
Just as you're speaking.
Trampling.
Yes, trampling, yes.
Yeah, trampling is a massive problem, and it's a problem which is getting bigger and bigger. We really have to look at what other countries have done and control people, and also where awareness raising on its own, I don't think is enough anymore because we've lost so much dune. The amount of dune we have has just shrunk, and the number of people using them has expanded. So I think cleverly designed boardwalks, fenced off with a funnel shape so that people don't go across, and an awareness campaign.
Very good. And just as you were talking there on sea buckthorn, Jack in the chat has mentioned that it's harvested in Lithuania for its berries, which are rich in vitamin C, and is also made into a drink.
Oh yeah, Netherlands as well. And skin cream, it's very high in vitamin C. I mean, we use it as well. We've always used it at home too. It's a magic thing. Just keep it out. I keep one at the edge of my house here, just for personal consumption.
Very good. We have another question about wind farms. So how will proposed wind farms off the East Coast affect biodiversity or the ecosystem?
If only we knew. The issue is we don't know enough about these areas, and that is why, I mean, we know, for example, that there are a lot of egg cases swept up of 4 different four different egg-laying fish, you know, like thornback ray and skates, bullhuss. They're all laying eggs on these sandbanks, and birds are feeding in that area. So I must say I am extremely worried if it happens too fast. The 7 wind turbines which were put there onto the Arklow Bank years back, I thought that the approach there was very reasonable. We put a few in and we really monitored. I haven't seen a single monitoring report, not one, about which animals go there, which don't, what patterns are there. We had such an opportunity to really learn, and why didn't we? The new windmills coming in will be far bigger, and I'm in an international group looking at this with Seas at Risk, and there are a lot of new issues coming up about whether the very large wind blades will also cause a sort of shaking of the seafloor. Having said all that, I still think we absolutely have to have wind power. We haven't really got the choice not to, but I'm not in favor of going at it too fast. I think we should take some and absolutely monitor every bit we are doing so that the next load we are more careful.
Great. So we have another question on your advice on protecting breeding sites of the sand martin.
It depends on where the breeding site is. So if the sand martins, if anybody knows them, you know, they go into sand cliffs and have these holes, these long little tunnels which they build. And I just love them. They're in different places. If they were clever enough to go onto a high cliff, like on several of the Wexford coasts, nobody will get at them. They're safe. Just don't do anything. The problem arises when they go onto low cliffs where people can get at them, and I have seen, or into dunes, where people are fascinated by tunnels, and particularly children, and they start hacking away. And the Kilmichael dunes 2 years ago, there were an awful lot of dead babies because people had actually, out of pure curiosity, just gone and dug into it. And these are orange or red listed, I'm not quite sure. So I think an awareness campaign, how special they are, you know, short footage. My view is that this year we should all stand up and say, RTE, we have got so much sports. For every hour of sport, we need an hour of nature. Now, they won't give us that, but at least they'll give us more than what we have.
It's like equality for nature.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
I agree. I'll join that campaign.
I already asked, but RTE said absolutely not, because nature doesn't do ads.
Right.
No, they were joking. No, they didn't say it that way. They just joked at it.
Another question about your views on the next phase of Natura 2000 funding.
I think the entire Natura 2000, the whole way it is done has to be reviewed. It's so overdue. We are reviewing National Parks and Wildlife Service at the moment, but we are not reviewing the way the Natura 2000 network is being handled. The European Commission and Ireland met earlier on, about 2 months ago, for bilateral to really look at this. How is nature law being implemented? And they also invited some of the NGOs in, or stakeholders in, including NGOs, to give their presentations, ask a few clarifying questions, and then they met on their own for 2 days. We have not heard what the outcome of that meeting is. So we're asking for more transparency, more public participation, and far more emphasis on celebrating nature, wanting to have nature. The reward for having really good quality and high quality getting even bigger reward, rather than this, you can't do this, you can't do that, because that just turns people off.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll have to get everyone to watch this presentation, so it's more of a celebration. You're getting such diverse questions, so thank you for being able to tackle all of these. The next one is about a question to ask if you could tell us about 2 very interesting plants, Salicornia and Spartina.
My goodness. Okay. So Salicornia is a delightful little thing which looks a bit like a cactus. I think we've got 5 different species of them, and it lives just at the edge of where the mean high tide ends, when normal high tide, and goes into the splash zone. And because of climate change and sea level rise, what we are seeing now is that it is moving on more onto land, onto low land. So there are two ways of looking at it. The Belgian government looked at it and said, so Salicornia has two other really important things. Apart from being a very odd looking little cactusy plant, it is absolutely delicious to eat. Now in France, because it's delicious to eat, they put in this lovely law of harvesting from the wild. And then the local authority can put in like a bylaw to say, well, you're not allowed to eat it at all or only X amount. So in Brittany, for example, you can have a Salicornia, but only as much as you can hold in one hand. In Belgium, they did a very interesting thing, and they said, okay, with sea level rise, we are going to lose the present positions of Salicornia, of glassworth. So let's try and make space for them on what is now low-lying land. So let's see what the conditions are. And Israel did the same. Let's put some scrapes in where the seeds can stay. It's an annual plant, so you have to always, except for one species, which is perennial, but most of it is annual. So you have to make sure that the right conditions are there for their seeds as well. And it starts popping up now in May as tiny little green waxy things coming out of the mud flats. And then you can see it going higher, and then it looks like a wax Christmas tree later. And it's delicious, but if you harvest it all before it can take seeds, you won't have it again. And Spartina is the exact opposite. You can't eat it. It's an invasive alien. Well, it's a hybrid between a native and an imported one. It was brought in first to reclaim land, but it just took off and is now a really serious problem, taking over areas from Salicornia and from seagrass, from Zostra. So if you see Spartina, there are 2 PhD works done on Spartina. I would say don't spray it, although spraying is quite popular, but strim it. And before you strim it, look whether in your particular area, it might just have some other really important function, like in Tremorbach Marsh, where it seems to be the most important area for baby crabs to go and hide when they're naked, when they are growing and have a big carapace. Hi. So those are the two. So what is Salicornia or glassworth, because they used to harvest it to lower the melting point of sand when they were making glass.
I've never heard of either, so that was very...
I'll add a slide then on them.
Excellent. One question I was thinking about myself is a kind of big question, perhaps. Jane on the chat had watched Seaspiracy on Netflix, and I don't know if you've seen it, yes. But
it's a must.
She's asking about your views on it. Yeah.
So overall, I think we needed something like that to get people to really talk and to think. My personal view is that it might have been wiser to pass it by a few more people beforehand and not to put things into it which can be attacked. You'd be better off separating it out into even 2 installments and being just that little bit more careful, because I think it gave too much food for critique, even though overall I think the idea that you start with something and that alerts you to something else and you go back and back and back and you see, whoa, this whole system has a problem. And that is the whole system which we have, for example, with salmon aquaculture. Has anybody looked at where the eggs are hatched and the smolts are growing. I've just been doing this and I just sort of see spirity. You know, you couldn't make it up.
Sorry. Out. Apologies.
Bath time.
The invasion. Yeah, that was a very interesting reaction as well from Padraig Fogarty from, is it Irish Wildlife Trust? I thought he wrote an interesting blog in reaction to Seaspiracy as well. So likewise saying, you know, really good to raise the awareness, but maybe some of the people working in this area might have been consulted more. So concurring. There's a question here from Pat to ask if you know how can local coastal communities apply for funding to restore and protect their coastal habitats and sand dunes.
I was thinking about that, and is that Pat Lawler? Yes, okay, Pat. Great. Let's put it the other way around. Ireland signed the Habitats Directive, designated sites, put in conservation objectives, then spent another 2.5 million or so to draft management plans, and then put them into boxes where they're resting. What we need, it's not up to the local community to raise the money to do this. We need a cooperative approach with government to put in conservation measures and management plans. And then, yes, it is fantastic if local communities support that and are participants and active stakeholders. But I do think that it is time that we see this is something which our government is legally obliged to do. And we need to remind them of that rather than running around and saying, oh, how can we do it? No, they need to support this.
We're nearly out of time unless, are there some more questions or does anyone want to put their hand up to speak? I know Jack O'Sullivan has been popping some great things into the chat. Did you want to add to that at all, Jack? Or
I wasn't planning on speaking, Claire and Karen. It's a great discussion. Hi, Karen.
Hi.
And what you said about Salicornia is just so amazing. I was really fascinated by what you said, how the French were controlling it and the Belgians, I think, as well. And then you said 2.5 million spent on management plans by the NPWS, never implemented. My God, sometimes this country, you know, we're great at doing some things and we're absolutely appalling at doing other things. But thanks anyway.
Yeah, but I think, you know, time we just, I feel as if we are literally on the verge of a big change.
Yeah.
It's like making a big snowman and all balls, and now we're going to push them over the side. And it will happen. I mean, at least we now have a coalition. We have all the stepping stones there. You know, it is officially a climate and biodiversity crisis. And we have, for the first time, several people in government who really have, you know, like Pippa, a science degree, who are thinking of, we just have to push a little bit more.
I agree 100%. We're nearly there. Another push, you know, and really make a noise. We have to make a noise. All of us who are biologists or environmental scientists just campaign loudly. Thanks, Karen.
Okay.
Super. Well, that is a really positive message to finish on. So I'd just like to say thank you so much, Karen, for that really interesting presentation. No slides, which was very refreshing as well. And the demonstrations with your seaweeds and shells as well. and lots of action that we can take. I've popped the Coastwatch website into the chat, so everyone's very much invited to go and have a look at that. And we'll also be sending around an email from Green Foundation Ireland after the event to look for a very short bit of feedback, five questions. So we'd be really grateful if you could fill that out, please. And if you'd like to join the database, the mailing list, to be kept informed of any news as well, you can add that to the questionnaire. And just to say too, there's another event coming up next Friday evening at 7 o'clock, which is on gardening for butterflies. So going back to land with Jesmond Harding of the Butterfly Conservation Ireland. And booking again is through the Green Foundation Ireland website. So thank you again, Karen.
No, it was a pleasure, and lovely old friends here too.
Excellent.
And we will be down on the west coast. We're starting to do a little bit of field work, and if anybody's interested, particularly in seagrass, so we will be going to Cork and Kerry next week, and then up Dublin way. Okay.
Super.
Thank you.
Is that on the biodiversity website, is it?
Some of them are, and some of them will be this evening or tomorrow evening. Sorry, Sunday evening. Yeah.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.